I am Vanessa, 33 years old and a corporate auditor. My family was busy celebrating my sister, the heroic doctor, saving lives in overseas clinics. Everyone called her our family pride. I was about to toast her until my husband, a digital forensic investigator, gripped my knee under the table. He leaned in, his eyes locked on my sister's designer Rolex and her flawless high-end resort tan. He whispered something does not add up. I froze. Before I continue the story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The clinking of crystal glasses and the low murmur of old money filled the Pinecrest Country Club. It was a Saturday evening, and my parents, Richard and Brenda, had rented out the most expensive private dining room to welcome my sister Samantha back to the United States. The room smelled of roasted tenderloin and expensive champagne. Waiters in crisp white shirts moved silently around the massive mahogany table, pouring Dom Perignon into the glasses of my parents' wealthy friends. I sat near the end of the table, pushed away from the center of attention, wearing a sensible navy blue dress. Next to me sat my husband David, who was quietly observing the spectacle. My mother Brenda leaned across the table, her heavy diamond necklace catching the light of the chandelier. She looked at Samantha with pure adoration before shifting her gaze to me with a familiar, disappointed smirk. You know, Vanessa, you really could learn a thing or two from your sister. Samantha is out there in the trenches, saving lives and making a real difference in the world. Staring at spreadsheets all day, trying to find missing pennies for corporate billionaires just seems so hollow in comparison. Do you not feel empty doing that kind of work? I simply smiled politely and took a sip of my sparkling water. As a corporate auditor, I was used to being called boring. I spent my days tracking financial discrepancies, uncovering corporate fraud, and ensuring that multi-million-dollar ledgers balanced perfectly. I loved my job. It paid incredibly well, and it afforded David and me a very comfortable life. But in my family, if you were not the center of attention or saving the world on a public stage, you were nothing. Samantha was the golden child. She had always been dramatic, loud, and demanding of praise. Tonight she was sitting at the head of the table wearing a flowing silk dress, looking like a glamorous humanitarian. My father Richard stood up and raised his glass, his booming voice demanding the attention of the entire room. Let us raise a glass to my beautiful daughter Samantha. She has spent the last year in the most dangerous, impoverished conditions imaginable, running a medical clinic with practically no resources. She sacrifices her own comfort to heal the less fortunate. We could not be more proud of our family saint. The guests at the table murmured in agreement, raising their glasses. I reached for my glass, preparing to drink to my sister. That was when David gripped my knee under the table. His hand squeezed firmly, stopping me. I looked over at him. David is a financial and digital forensic investigator for the government. His entire career is built on reading tiny details that other people miss. He leaned in close to my ear, his voice barely a whisper. Look at her left wrist. Then look at her tan. Something does not add up, Vanessa. I followed his gaze. Samantha was holding up her champagne flute, laughing modestly at a compliment from a local politician seated next to her. Poking out from the silk sleeve of her dress was a heavy silver watch. It was a Rolex Oyster Perpetual, not a cheap knockoff, but a pristine, authentic piece that cost upwards of $15,000. Then I looked at her skin. My father had just claimed she was working in impoverished conditions in a remote village, yet Samantha had a flawless golden tan. It was not the kind of tan you get from working outdoors in a harsh environment. It was an expensive, even spray tan, or the result of weeks lounging under a cabana. Her nails were perfectly manicured with a fresh French tip. Her hair was glossed and styled. There were no signs of exhaustion, no signs of rough living. She looked like she had just stepped off a yacht in the Mediterranean. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I froze, staring at the watch catching the light. Before my brain could even begin to process the implications of what David had just pointed out, the dinner took a sudden and terrifying turn. My father tapped his spoon against his crystal glass again, ringing out a sharp chime that silenced the room. "Thank you all for coming," he announced, his chest puffed out with pride. "As you know, Samantha is returning to her clinic next month, but she cannot do it alone. The conditions are worsening and they desperately need a new medical wing. Brenda and I have decided that philanthropy begins at home. We cannot ask our friends to open their wallets if we do not open ours first. So tonight, I am thrilled to announce that Brenda and I are taking out a $150,000 second mortgage on our family estate. Every single penny of that equity will go directly to Samantha to fund her new medical clinic." The room erupted into applause. The wealthy guests clapped enthusiastically, praising my parents for their incredible generosity and selfless spirit. Samantha brought her hands to her face, looking down and shaking her shoulders as if she were crying tears of profound gratitude. But I was not clapping. My blood turned to ice. My heart started pounding against my ribs so hard I thought the person next to me could hear it. The family estate my father was talking about leveraging was not entirely his. 5 years ago, my father's contracting business took a massive hit. He and my mother were on the verge of bankruptcy and foreclosure. They came to me begging for help. I drained my savings and used 3 years' worth of my corporate auditing bonuses to pay the massive down payment required to refinance the house and save them from ruin. Because of my financial contribution, my name was put on the deed of the house. I owned a significant portion of that equity. They legally could not take out a second mortgage without my signature. They had not asked me. They had not discussed this with me. They were announcing it in a room full of the most powerful people in town, to publicly corner me into agreeing. They were trying to use my money to fund Samantha. I pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the marble floor, cutting through the applause. I stood up. The table slowly went quiet as everyone turned to look at me, expecting me to say something touching about my sister. I looked directly at my father. "No, you are not," I said. My voice was calm, but it carried across the silent dining room like a gunshot. Richard blinked, his smile faltering. "Excuse me, Vanessa. What did you say?" I kept my posture perfectly straight. "I said you are not taking out a second mortgage on the estate. I paid the initial down payment to save that house 5 years ago. My name is on the deed alongside yours. I will not sign off on leveraging the property for $150,000. The answer is absolutely not." Dead silence fell over the Pinecrest Country Club private dining room. The politicians and lawyers sitting around the table stared at me in shock. You could have heard a pin drop. Samantha slowly lowered her hands from her face. The fake tears were gone, replaced by a sharp, panicked glare. She looked down at the table, biting her lip and playing the victim perfectly, shrinking into her chair as if I had just physically struck her. "My mother?" Brenda slammed her hand onto the mahogany table. The silverware rattled. "How dare you, Vanessa!" she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. Her face turned red as she looked around the room, trying to perform for the audience. "You have always been jealous of her calling. Always. Ever since you were little, you could not stand it when Samantha got the attention she deserved. Your sister is out there starving and bleeding to save dying children, and you are sitting on a pile of money refusing to help. Why are you so incredibly greedy?" My brother Ryan, who had been quiet all evening, chimed in from across the table. "Jesus, Vanessa," he muttered, shaking his head in disgust. "You are embarrassing the family. You make plenty of money counting other people's cash. Let Mom and Dad do this. It is just paper to you, but it is life and death for Samantha's patients. Stop being such a selfish brat." I looked at Ryan, then at my mother, and finally at Samantha. Samantha briefly met my eyes. Behind her victimized expression, I saw a flicker of a smug, challenging smile. She thought she had won. She thought the public pressure of these wealthy guests would force me to back down and sign the papers to avoid a scandal. She thought the boring corporate auditor would just fold under the weight of family expectations like I always did when we were kids. But she forgot one crucial detail. I find missing money for a living, and my husband finds the truth. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply picked up my silk napkin, placed it neatly on the table, and looked my parents dead in the eye. I will not be bullied into financial ruin to fund a lie. I said, my voice steady and cold. I am leaving. Do not contact me about this mortgage again. As I turned to walk away, Samantha suddenly stood up. She rushed over to me, pushing a glossy, colorful donation flyer into my hands. Her perfume smelled like expensive vanilla, not hospital antiseptic. Just think about the children you are depriving, sweetie, she said, her voice dripping with passive-aggressive sweetness, loud enough for the whole room to hear. Take this. Maybe your cold heart will warm up by morning. I took the flyer and walked toward the exit. While Samantha was busy gloating and the table was erupting into angry whispers, David calmly stepped up beside me. Before we walked out the door, he casually pulled out his phone. Without anyone noticing, he scanned the donation QR code printed on the bottom of Samantha's glossy flyer. He slipped his phone back into his suit jacket, looked at me, and nodded toward the door. The trap was set, and my family had no idea what they had just awakened. The heavy silence in the room was shattered by a loud scoff from across the table. It was my brother Ryan. He threw his expensive linen napkin onto his empty plate and leaned forward, his face twisted in absolute disgust. Ryan was a junior partner at a wealth management firm, a position my father bought for him. He was the golden boy, constantly shielded from his bad financial decisions by our parents' checkbook. Now he was using that privileged arrogance to attack me in front of 50 wealthy strangers. Jesus, Vanessa, he said, his voice echoing off the mahogany walls. You are a complete embarrassment to this family. Mom and Dad have spent decades building a philanthropic image in this community. They are trying to leave a legacy of healing and generosity. And you are throwing a childish tantrum over property you barely use. You make more than enough money sitting in your sterile office auditing other people's hard work. You do not need that house equity. Samantha actually needs it to save human lives. My mother, Brenda, nodded along her diamond earrings, shaking. Exactly, Ryan, she chimed in, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. She turned back to the crowd of doctors and lawyers who were watching the drama unfold. I am so sorry, everyone, my mother announced, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. We raised Vanessa to be generous, but the corporate world made her so cold and calculated. She simply does not understand the value of human life the way Samantha does. The gaslighting was suffocating. They were actively painting me as a greedy corporate villain, while standing in a room paid for by my money, trying to steal my home equity to fund a fake medical clinic. I looked at the faces of my parents' friends. Some were shaking their heads in disapproval. In the past, this exact tactic would have crushed me. The sheer weight of their collective disapproval was designed to break my boundaries and force compliance. But I was not that insecure little girl anymore. I was a 33-year-old woman who stared down tax evaders for a living. My family thought they could use high society pressure to force me to sign away $150,000. They severely miscalculated. Instead of screaming or defending myself to a room full of strangers, I took a deep breath. I reached for my silk napkin, folded it neatly into a perfect square, and placed it gently next to my untouched dinner plate. Every movement I made was deliberate and completely calm. The contrast between their emotional hysteria and my quiet composure made the room feel even more tense. I looked directly at Ryan. I do not care about your philanthropic image, Ryan, I said, my voice dropping to a steady pitch that carried across the table. And I do not care what anyone in this room thinks of me. You and Mom and Dad can put on whatever show you want tonight, but I am not pretending to be something I am not. I saved that house from foreclosure 5 years ago when the rest of you were spending money you did not have. My name is on the deed, and my answer is final. I will not be bullied into financial ruin to fund this charade. I pushed my chair back and stood up. David stood up immediately beside me, his presence a silent wall of support. He did not need to say a word, his posture made it clear we were a united front. We gathered our coats and prepared to leave. The country club guests parted slightly as we moved away from the table, creating a narrow walkway toward the heavy oak doors. Just as we were about to walk past the head of the table, Samantha suddenly jumped up. She could not let me have the last word. She needed to play the martyr one final time for her audience. She rushed into my path, blocking my way to the door. Her face was perfectly arranged into an expression of tragic pity. In her hand she held a stack of glossy, colorful donation flyers my parents had printed for the event. She reached out and forcefully shoved one of the thick paper flyers against my chest, forcing me to take it. She stepped uncomfortably close to me, invading my personal space. Her expensive perfume was overwhelming. "Just think about the children you are depriving, sweetie," Samantha whispered, projecting her voice just enough so the closest tables could hear her tragic plea. "I hope your bank accounts keep you warm at night because your heart is completely frozen. Please look at the faces of the people you are leaving to die." I looked down at the flyer in my hand. It was a high-quality print featuring stock photos of smiling children and bold text asking for immediate emergency funding. At the very bottom right corner was a large black and white square, a custom QR code designed to take wealthy donors straight to a payment portal. I stared at Samantha, her smug, passive-aggressive smile glowing under the chandelier light. She thought she was so incredibly smart. She thought she had just delivered the perfect final blow, sealing her image as the selfless hero while casting me out as the villain. But while she was busy gloating and maintaining eye contact with me, she completely ignored my husband standing quietly by my side. David had his phone in his hand, angled down, seemingly harmless. But with a swift, practiced motion, he opened his secure camera application. While Samantha was delivering her self-righteous speech, David held his phone just over the edge of the flyer in my hand. The camera perfectly focused on the donation QR code at the bottom. A tiny green square appeared on his screen, confirming the link had been successfully captured and logged into his encrypted digital forensics database. He slipped the phone into his jacket without a sound. He looked at me, his expression neutral, his eyes signaling he had exactly what he needed. I did not say another word to Samantha. I stepped around her, leaving her standing in her own fake tragedy. David and I walked out the heavy oak doors, leaving the whispering room behind us. We stepped into the cool evening air. The public humiliation was over, but the investigation had just begun. The aggressive ringing of the doorbell shattered the quiet Sunday morning. After the disastrous dinner, David and I stayed up late discussing our next moves. He was already in his home office running diagnostics on the digital fingerprint. I was standing in the kitchen pouring coffee when the heavy pounding started. My stomach tightened, but I walked to the entryway. When I opened the door, I met the furious faces of my father Richard, my mother Brenda, and my brother Ryan. There were no apologies for the public humiliation they attempted last night. Before I could speak, my father pushed past me, stepping into my foyer. My mother followed close behind while Ryan brought up the rear, glaring at me. They marched into my kitchen, taking over the space as if they still owned me. My father reached inside his leather briefcase and pulled out a stack of legal documents. He slapped them onto my granite kitchen island with a loud smack. The papers slid across the smooth surface, stopping next to my coffee mug. It was the paperwork for the $150,000 second mortgage. Bright yellow sticky notes protruded from the edges, indicating where my signature was required. "Sign it, Vanessa," my father demanded, his voice echoing off the walls. "We are done playing these childish games with you. You made a fool out of us last night in front of the most important people in our community. I brought a notary from my office who is waiting in the car. You are going to sign these papers right now, and we are going to fix the mess you made." I crossed my arms, feeling the familiar weight of their intimidation tactics, trying to crush my boundaries. "I already gave you my answer last night," I said calmly. "I am not leveraging my financial security to fund a fake clinic. The answer is no." My father's face turned a deep crimson. He leaned over the kitchen island, planting his hands on the granite. "If you do not sign this right now, Vanessa, I will take you to court. I will file a partition lawsuit by tomorrow morning. We will force the legal sale of the entire estate. We will liquidate the property, take our share, and leave you with nothing but legal fees. Do you really want to drag this family into a vicious public court battle over a simple signature? My mother Brenda stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with him. Her eyes were cold. "Why do you always have to be so difficult?" she asked, her tone dripping with disappointment. "We have always tried to treat you and Samantha equally, but you make it impossible. Your sister is giving her life to the less fortunate, and you are hoarding your wealth. We paid for her medical school applications. We paid for her luxury apartment so she could study in peace. We bought her that car so she would be safe. We did all of that because she has a higher calling." I stared at her, letting the absurdity of her words sink in. "You treated us equally?" I repeated, my voice thick with disbelief. "Mom, when I went to college, you told me I had to take out student loans because the business was struggling. I worked 2 jobs to pay for my apartment while studying for my auditing exams. I paid off my own debt. I paid your mortgage down payment when you were about to lose everything. You never subsidized my life, but you funded every single one of Samantha's luxury vacations, and now you want me to pay for her again." My mother scoffed, rolling her eyes. "You sit in an air-conditioned office counting other people's money, Vanessa. You do not save lives. Samantha needs this money to heal sick children. You are just being petty, because you never got the spotlight." That was when Ryan stepped out from behind our parents. He closed the distance between us, invading my personal space. He used his physical presence to try and intimidate me, just like he did when we were kids. He pointed a finger inches from my face. "You are literally tearing this family apart over pennies, Vanessa," he spat. 150 grand is nothing. It is a drop in the bucket for the estate, and you know it. Mom and Dad are drowning in stress trying to help our sister, and you are standing here acting like some greedy corporate tyrant. Just sign the damn paper and stop destroying this family." I did not step back. I looked Ryan directly in the eyes, refusing to show fear. $150,000 is not pennies, Ryan," I said quietly. "And if it is so insignificant, why do you not empty your own savings accounts to fund her? Why do you not leverage your own home? Why is it always my money expected to save the day?" Ryan shifted his weight, his jaw clenching. "Because your name is on the deed," he muttered. "Exactly," I replied. "My name is on the deed, which means my signature is required. And I am telling all of you right now to get out of my house. I will not sign these papers today, tomorrow, or ever. If you want to sue me for a partition sale, tell your lawyers to contact mine. I will see you in court." My father snatched the documents off the counter, his face contorted with rage. "You are going to regret this," he threatened. "We will destroy you." They turned and stormed out of my house, slamming the front door behind them. I stood alone in my kitchen, the silence rushing back in. They thought they had backed me into a corner with their threats of a lawsuit. They had no idea that upstairs in his office, David was already assembling the digital evidence that would bring their entire world crashing down. The tension in my kitchen was so thick you could cut it with a knife. My father had just snatched the legal documents off the granite island and threatened to destroy me in court. I stood my ground, refusing to back down. But before anyone could take another step toward the front door, a sharp ringing sound pierced the heavy silence. It was my mother, Brenda. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her phone. She looked at the screen and gasped dramatically, placing her hand over her heart. "It is your sister," she announced, her voice trembling with manufactured anxiety. "It is Samantha calling from the clinic." My mother swiped the screen and immediately tapped the speakerphone button, holding the device up in the middle of my kitchen as if it were a sacred artifact. The audio connected with a burst of manufactured static and heavy, frantic breathing. Samantha was putting on the performance of a lifetime. "Mom, is that you?" Samantha cried. Her voice was breathy and strained, perfectly calibrated to sound like a woman pushed to the absolute brink of exhaustion. "I am here. My darling," my mother cooed, stepping closer to the phone. "We are all here. Your father and your brother are with me. We are at your sister's house trying to fix this terrible misunderstanding." A loud, tragic sob echoed from the tiny speaker. "Oh, Mom, it is a disaster," Samantha wailed. "The main power generator at the clinic just completely died. We are plunged into total darkness. The medical refrigerators are failing as we speak. We are going to lose all of our life-saving antibiotics and vaccines by morning if we do not get the funds to replace the system right now." I crossed my arms and stared at the phone. It was almost comical how perfectly timed this phone call was. It was as if they had rehearsed this exact scenario in the car on the way over. Samantha continued her Oscar-worthy monologue, painting a gruesome picture of innocent people suffering in the dark, while she heroically tried to hold everything together with her bare hands. "I told them the money was coming," Samantha sobbed, her voice cracking perfectly. "I promised the local staff that my family was sending the $150,000 today to save the facility. They are looking at me with such hope, Mom. How am I supposed to look them in the eyes and tell them that my own sister would rather let them suffer than sign a simple piece of paper? How can Vanessa be so incredibly selfish?" My mother brought her free hand to her mouth, letting out a sympathetic whimper. She looked up from the phone and locked eyes with me. The look she gave me was one of pure, unadulterated disgust. It was the kind of look you give a monster. She was weaponizing my sister's fake tears to crush my spirit and force me into submission. "Do not worry, my brave girl, my father." Richard leaned in, shouting toward the phone's microphone. "We will not let your patients suffer. We will handle your sister. Just keep doing your beautiful work." Ryan stepped closer to the phone as well, shaking his head in theatrical disbelief. "Hang in there, Sam," he said, his voice thick with righteous anger. "You are a hero. We are not going to let her greedy corporate mindset destroy everything you have built." The sheer level of manipulation happening in my own kitchen was suffocating. They were actively participating in a shared delusion, validating Samantha's lies to make themselves feel like saviors while casting me as the ultimate villain. I stood perfectly still, keeping my face neutral. My brain automatically shifted into corporate auditor mode. I listened closely to the background noise on the call. There were no frantic footsteps, no echoing hospital corridors, and no beeping medical monitors. The static sounded artificial, like a sound effect played from a secondary device. I knew for a fact that Samantha was not sitting in a dark clinic holding failing medical supplies. Thanks to David, I knew she was most likely sitting by a sparkling resort pool, sipping a cocktail and laughing at how easily she could manipulate our parents. But I could not say that yet. I did not have the physical proof printed out and organized. If I accused her of faking the call right now, without dropping the hard evidence, they would simply twist it into another attack on my character. They would call me paranoid and jealous. So I remained silent, letting them exhaust their theatrical performance. "Vanessa, are you listening to this?" my mother demanded, lowering the phone slightly to glare at me. "Are you listening to the pain you are causing? Human lives are literally on the line, and you are standing there with no emotion on your face. You are completely heartless. Tell her I forgive her." Samantha whimpered loudly through the speaker, making sure I heard every word. "Tell her I will pray that she finds some compassion in her soul. I have to go, Mom. I have to go try to manually pump the ventilator for a little boy. Pray for us." The call disconnected with a dramatic click. The silence that followed was heavy and accusatory. My mother slowly lowered the phone, slipping it back into her handbag with a deep, sorrowful sigh. She looked at me as if I were a stranger she deeply regretted bringing into the world. My father stepped forward, his face hard and uncompromising. He did not bother raising his voice this time. The quiet threat was far more menacing. "You have exactly 48 hours, Vanessa," he said, his tone cold and absolute. "You have 48 hours to call my office, tell my secretary you are ready, and sign the mortgage documents. If I do not hear from you by Tuesday morning, we are done playing nice." He picked up his leather briefcase, gripping the handle tightly. "If you refuse to sign, we will not just sue you for the partition sale. We will publicly disown you. We will call every single member of our extended family, every aunt, uncle, and cousin. We will tell them exactly why the clinic failed. We will tell them that your greed directly resulted in the loss of human life. You will be completely erased from this family. Nobody will ever speak to you again." Ryan scoffed, pushing past me toward the hallway. "You are dead to us if you do not fix this." "Vanessa," he muttered without even looking at me. My mother followed him, not bothering to say goodbye. She just shook her head, her diamond earrings catching the morning light. They marched down the hallway, their footsteps heavy and aggressive on my hardwood floors. I stood in the kitchen and listened as they reached the front door. My father grabbed the heavy brass handle, pulled the door wide open, and slammed it shut behind them with a deafening crash that shook the walls of my house. The sound of the slamming door echoed through the empty hallway, leaving a ringing in my ears. The vibration rattled the picture frames hanging on the walls. I was officially on the clock. They had given me 48 hours to surrender my financial security or lose my entire family. They thought the threat of being disowned would break me. They thought the fear of being outcasted by the extended family would force me to crawl back and sign the papers. They were wrong. I walked over to the kitchen island, picked up my cold coffee mug, and took a slow, deliberate sip. I did not feel fear. I felt an absolute burning clarity. They had drawn their line in the sand. Now it was my turn to cross it. Up in his office, David was already assembling the weapon that would burn their fake philanthropic empire to the ground. Let the 48 hours begin. The sound of the front door slamming was still echoing in my bones. I stood in the kitchen looking at the empty space where my parents and brother had just been standing. They had given me an ultimatum of 48 hours to sign away my financial security or face complete exile from the only family I had ever known. The emotional manipulation was exhausting. It was designed to break me down, to make me feel so isolated and terrified of abandonment that I would do anything just to be allowed back into their good graces. For a brief moment, the old childhood fears crept into my chest. The little girl inside me, who just wanted her mother to look at her with pride, told me to pick up the phone, call the lawyer, and sign the house away. But then I looked at the staircase leading up to the second floor. I remembered that I was not alone. I took a deep breath, left the kitchen, and walked up the stairs toward the home office. When I pushed the door open, the room was dark, except for the bright blue glow of multiple computer monitors. David was sitting at his large oak desk, his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard, with a rhythmic clacking sound. He was entirely in his element. As a forensic investigator for the government, David spent his days tracking digital footprints and unraveling complex financial webs. He did not operate on emotion or guilt trips. He operated on cold, hard data. I walked over and stood behind his ergonomic chair, resting my hands on his shoulders. He leaned back slightly, acknowledging my presence, but his eyes never left the screens. He had already pulled out the glossy donation flyer that Samantha had shoved into my hands at the country club the night before. The flyer was sitting under a bright desk lamp, its QR code perfectly illuminated against the dark wood of the desk. "What are you looking at?" I asked quietly, trying to push the image of my furious father out of my mind. David tapped a few more keys and a series of terminal windows popped up on his left monitor. "I am following the money," he replied, his voice calm and steady. "That little stunt your sister pulled last night giving you this flyer might have been her biggest mistake yet. People think QR codes are magic, but they are just digital doorways, and every door has a registered address." He explained that he was using open-source intelligence, or OSINT, to track the destination of the payment portal. He was not using any restricted government databases or classified tools. He was simply using publicly available information that anyone with the right technical knowledge could access. It was completely legal and completely devastating. I watched as lines of code and registration details scrolled past. David isolated the web domain linked to the QR code and ran a reverse lookup on the hosting registry. Within minutes, he had the routing numbers for the bank account attached to the payment gateway. David opened a new browser window and navigated to the official public database for the Internal Revenue Service. If Samantha was running a legitimate medical charity, she would have to be registered as a tax-exempt 501c3 organization. This is a strict federal requirement for anyone soliciting tax-deductible donations from the public, especially for international relief efforts. David typed in the exact name of her supposed clinic as printed on the glossy flyer. He hit enter. The screen loaded for a second before displaying a stark white page with bold black text indicating 0 results found. He tried searching by her legal name. 0 results. He tried searching by the mailing address listed on the flyer. 0 results again. He turned his ergonomic chair slightly to look up at me. Your sister does not have a registered charity, Vanessa. This is a personal bank account. She is collecting hundreds of thousands of dollars from wealthy donors under the guise of medical relief, but legally it is just money going straight into her own pocket. The reality of the situation began to settle over me like a heavy blanket. This was no longer just a toxic family dynamic involving favoritism and emotional abuse. This was a concrete financial crime. My parents were actively soliciting funds for a fraudulent entity. They were acting as accomplices whether they knew the full extent of the lie or not. But David was not finished pulling on the thread. He opened his personal email account and asked me to forward him the frantic medical emergency emails Samantha had been sending the family over the last 3 years. You know, the ones where she claimed to be trapped in remote villages, fighting outbreaks with no electricity, and begging for immediate cash transfers. I pulled out my phone and forwarded him half a dozen emails from my archives. David opened the message headers. He explained to me that every single email carries an invisible digital fingerprint called an IP address, which reveals the physical location of the server where the email was actually sent. He ran the IP addresses through a global geolocation tracker. A massive high-resolution map of the world appeared on his center monitor. I braced myself, expecting to see pings from remote locations in developing nations or war-torn borders. Instead, a bright red pin dropped onto the map right in the middle of the sparkling ocean. I leaned in closer, squinting at the screen in disbelief. The IP address from an email she sent 2 years ago begging for emergency funds for a severe malaria outbreak originated from a 5-star luxury resort in the Maldives. David clicked on the next email. Another red pin dropped, this time on the tropical coast of Mexico. The email, where she claimed the clinic roof had collapsed in a storm and she was sleeping in the mud, was sent from the private wireless network of an exclusive boutique hotel in Tulum. Every single urgent, desperate plea for cash had been sent from a high-end vacation destination while she was sipping cocktails on the beach. David highlighted the geolocation data, the unregistered tax status, and the personal routing information. He compiled all of this damning evidence into a single clean document, formatting it so perfectly that anyone could understand the grift at a single glance. He hit the print command. The laser printer in the corner of the office hummed to life, spitting out a single sheet of crisp white paper. He grabbed the warm paper from the tray, stood up from his desk, and walked past me toward the door. I followed him downstairs back to the kitchen, where the air still felt thick with my family's threats. He stopped at the granite island right where my parents had just stood, throwing their weight around. David slid the single sheet of paper across the smooth stone surface. It came to a stop exactly where the second mortgage documents had been resting just moments ago. He looked at me, his expression completely serious and unwavering. "Your sister is not a doctor, Vanessa," he said softly. "She is a criminal, and your family is holding the bag." I stared down at the printed page. The ink was still warm, but the data it held was ice cold. All those years of being told I was selfish, all those years of being pushed aside for the family saint, had just been instantly dismantled by a few lines of code. We did not just have leverage now. We had the absolute power to destroy her entire facade. I held the crisp white sheet of paper that David had printed. It was the ultimate proof of my sister's massive deception. I folded it neatly and slid it into a plain manila folder. I pulled out my phone and sent Samantha a brief text message. I told her we needed to talk immediately, just the two of us, and I named a small independent coffee shop downtown. It was a neutral location far away from the country club crowds in our parents' house. I told her that if she wanted any chance of getting the mortgage money, she had to meet me there in 30 minutes. I drove to the cafe and secured a small corner table near the back window. I ordered a plain black coffee and waited, holding the manila folder flat against the wooden table. Exactly 20 minutes later, Samantha walked in carrying herself like a celebrity. She was wearing oversized designer sunglasses, a cashmere sweater, and carrying a leather handbag that cost more than my first car. She looked around the room with a subtle expression of distaste before locking eyes with me. She took her time walking over to my table, her heels clicking loudly against the polished concrete floor. She pulled out the metal chair across from me and sat down heavily, letting out a long, exaggerated sigh. She took off her sunglasses, placing them next to my coffee mug. She looked at me with severe annoyance. She ordered an iced vanilla latte. Once the barista walked away, Samantha leaned forward. "So, what is this about Vanessa?" she asked. "You dragged me down here to tell me you will sign the mortgage papers. Because if this is another selfish lecture, I do not have the time. I have dying patients relying on me." I did not react to her passive-aggressive tone. I looked at her perfectly clear skin, her expensive salon blowout, and her immaculate manicure. There was absolutely nothing about her that suggested she had spent the last year in a developing country fighting disease. I kept my face completely neutral. I placed my hand on top of the manila folder and slowly slid it across the smooth wooden table until it rested directly in front of her. "I am not signing the mortgage papers, Samantha," I said quietly. "And neither are Mom and Dad. That money is not going anywhere. Open the folder." Samantha stared at the cardboard folder for a long moment. She let out a short, arrogant laugh. She dramatically rolled her eyes, flipped open the cover, and looked down at the single sheet of paper David had prepared. I watched her eyes scan the page. I explained exactly what she was looking at without raising my voice. I told her that my husband David was a forensic investigator and he had pulled the digital footprint of her entire operation. I pointed out the official Internal Revenue Service database search printed at the top of the page. I told her that her supposed medical clinic was not registered as a tax-exempt charity. It did not exist in any federal database. I then pointed to the routing numbers associated with the donation QR code she was handing out to wealthy people at the country club. I explained that those numbers traced back to a personal bank account. Finally, I pointed to the global map printed at the bottom of the page. I told her we tracked the IP addresses from every single frantic emergency email she had sent over the last 3 years. I read the locations aloud: the luxury resort in the Maldives, the boutique hotel in Tulum, the private villa in Ibiza. I sat back in my chair and waited. I expected the facade to shatter. I expected the color to drain from her face. I braced myself for the tears, the frantic begging, or the desperate excuses. I thought she would panic, knowing that her entire philanthropic identity was built on a massive, verifiable lie. I thought she would try to apologize or beg me not to tell our parents. I gave her the only out I was willing to offer. I told her that she needed to go to Mom and Dad today and confess everything. She needed to tell them the clinic was fake and stop the second mortgage before they committed federal wire fraud. I promised her that if she came clean to the family and shut down the fake charity, I would not take this file to the authorities. The barista returned and placed Samantha's iced latte on the table. Samantha waited until the barista walked away before she made her move. She looked down at the paper again. Then slowly, she reached for her tall glass. She took a long, deliberate sip of her iced latte. She swallowed, set the glass down, and looked directly into my eyes. And then Samantha did something that chilled me to the bone. She smiled. It was a genuine, broad, arrogant smile. She let out a loud, melodic laugh that turned the heads of a few people sitting at the tables near us. She closed the manila folder with a flick of her wrist and pushed it casually back across the table toward me. "Is that it?" she asked, her voice dripping with absolute amusement. "You had your little husband hack into the internet to print out some computer numbers, And you think you caught me? You think a piece of paper with some maps and codes on it is going to destroy everything I have built? Vanessa, you are even more pathetic than I thought. She leaned over the table, her smile vanishing, replaced by a cold, predatory glare. Let me explain how the real world works to you, little sister. Nobody cares about your IP addresses. Nobody cares about tax codes or routing numbers. Do you know what they care about? They care about the story. Mom and Dad care about the prestige of telling their friends their daughter is a hero. I give them exactly what they want. I am the golden child. I am the saint. And you are just the jealous, boring auditor who wants to ruin everything. She picked up her designer sunglasses and slid them back onto her face, hiding her eyes behind the dark lenses. You are not going to tell Mom and Dad anything, she whispered. And you are going to sign those mortgage papers by tomorrow morning, just like Dad said. She stood up, grabbed her expensive leather handbag, and picked up her iced latte. She looked down at me one last time, leaving the folder sitting uselessly on the table between us. I am not afraid of your computer numbers, Vanessa, she said, her voice loud enough for the cafe to hear. Have a nice day at work counting pennies. Samantha turned and walked out of the coffee shop, her heels clicking confidently against the floor. I sat alone at the small wooden table, my black coffee growing cold. I had expected her to break under the weight of the truth. Instead, she had laughed in my face and doubled down on her deception. She was entirely confident that her manipulation of our parents would protect her from any consequences. She thought she was untouchable. But as I slid the folder back into my bag, my shock quickly hardened into pure resolve. She had just drawn the battle lines, and she was about to find out that computer numbers were the exact things that put people like her in federal prison. Samantha had just dismissed the folder as meaningless computer numbers. She picked up her expensive designer handbag and her iced latte, ready to walk out and leave me sitting in defeat. But she only made it 2 steps away from our small wooden table before she stopped. The confident clicking of her high heels halted abruptly on the polished concrete floor of the coffee shop. I watched her perfectly styled shoulders stiffen under her cashmere sweater. She slowly turned around and walked back to the table. She did not pull out her chair to sit down. Instead, she placed both of her perfectly manicured hands flat on the wooden surface and leaned her upper body across the table toward me. The arrogant and dismissive smile she wore just seconds ago was completely gone. In its place was a dead and empty stare. It was the terrifying look of a cornered predator who suddenly realized her prey was actually trying to fight back. Her oversized designer sunglasses slid slightly down the bridge of her nose, revealing eyes that were cold, calculating, and entirely devoid of empathy. You really thought you could just trap me, Vanessa? She whispered. Her voice dropped to a low, menacing pitch that barely rose above the background hum of the room, but it cut through the air like a razor blade. You thought you could send your little husband digging into my personal life, and I would just roll over and cry and beg for your forgiveness. You seem to have completely forgotten who you are dealing with. She leaned in even closer, until I could smell the strong vanilla notes of her expensive perfume mixing with the bitter scent of my cold black coffee. She wanted to physically intimidate me. Let us talk about David for a second. She continued, her tone dripping with venom. Your sweet, boring husband who works for the federal government. He is a digital forensic investigator, right? He has high-level security clearances. He has special access to restricted federal databases, complex financial tracking systems, and private citizen tax records. I felt my stomach drop as her words hung in the air. I kept my face perfectly still, but a cold chill washed over my arms. I knew for a fact that David had only used open-source intelligence and completely public records to find the information inside that manila folder. He had strictly followed the law and adhered to every single ethical guideline of his agency. But Samantha did not care about the truth. She only cared about the narrative she could spin to protect her image. Do you know what this looks like to a federal oversight committee, Vanessa? She asked. A malicious joy began to creep back into her voice. It looks like a jealous and bitter sister-in-law convinced her federal agent husband to abuse his top-secret government clearance to cyberstalk me. It looks like David illegally accessed restricted federal systems to track my personal bank accounts and monitor my private international travel records just to harass his wife's successful sister. My mind started racing. As a corporate auditor, I understood the sheer destructive power of a formal investigation. Even if David was eventually cleared of all wrongdoing, the initial accusation alone would be catastrophic. The optics of a federal agent stalking a humanitarian doctor would be a media nightmare. "If you show that folder to Mom and Dad," she hissed, her eyes locking onto mine, "I will not even bother defending myself against your stupid internet addresses. I will go straight to the police station. I will file a formal administrative complaint with his federal agency. I will contact the licensing board, the ethics committee, and the office of the inspector general. I will tell them that I am absolutely terrified for my physical safety because a rogue federal investigator is using classified government surveillance tools to stalk me across the globe." She paused to let the weight of her threat sink in. Who do you think they are going to believe, Vanessa? The heroic doctor who runs a medical charity for dying children, or the creepy government agent who is obsessed with tracking a young woman on her vacations? By the time they launch the internal affairs investigation, David will be immediately placed on unpaid administrative leave. They will raid your house and seize his computers. They will freeze his pension and revoke his security clearance. And when I am done crying to the investigators playing the terrified victim, I will have his badge, his pension, and his freedom by Friday. The sheer cruelty of her plan left me speechless. She was willing to completely destroy the life and career of an innocent man just to keep up her charade. David had worked his entire adult life to build his career in federal law enforcement, and my sister was threatening to rip all of that away and throw him in federal prison based on a completely fabricated story. I remembered a time in high school when a teacher caught Samantha cheating on a final exam. Instead of accepting the failing grade, Samantha accused the teacher of making inappropriate comments toward her. She cried in the principal's office and put on such a convincing performance that the teacher was forced to resign to avoid a scandal. I knew she would not hesitate to destroy David over a $150,000 mortgage and her fake philanthropic empire. She stood up straight, adjusting the sleeves of her cashmere sweater with a sickeningly calm demeanor. "So here is how this is going to play out, little sister," she instructed. "You are going to take that pathetic manila folder and you are going to throw it in the trash can on your way out of this cafe. You are not going to say a single word about this conversation to our parents. You are going to pick up your phone right now, call Dad's secretary, and tell her you are ready to sign the mortgage documents." She picked up her iced latte and took a slow, confident sip. "You are going to sign over that $150,000 by tomorrow morning. If you hesitate for even one single second, if you try to show that fake evidence to anyone in our family, I will make the phone calls and I will make sure David spends the next 10 years in a federal penitentiary." She looked down at me, waiting for my reaction. She desperately wanted to see the panic in my eyes. She expected me to beg her not to ruin my husband. I refused to give her the satisfaction. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap and my breathing steady. I looked back at her with the same unyielding expression I used when confronting corrupt executives. "You are completely out of your mind, Samantha," I said quietly but firmly. "But you really think you can destroy an innocent man just to cover up your fake charity?" "Watch me," she replied with a dark, empty smile. "You have until tomorrow morning, Vanessa." Tick-tock. She turned around and finally walked out of the coffee shop, leaving me sitting alone in the corner booth. The small bell above the glass door chimed cheerfully as she exited, creating a jarring contrast to the heavy, suffocating dread that had just settled over my table. I sat there in the silence, listening to the low hum of the cafe. The situation had just escalated from a toxic family dispute over real estate into a dangerous game of federal extortion. Samantha thought she had played the ultimate trump card. She thought she had trapped me in an impossible dilemma. I could either sign away my financial security and let my parents commit fraud, or I could refuse and watch my husband go to prison on false charges. If I gave in to her demands and signed the mortgage papers, she would never stop. Blackmail never ends with just one payment. She would hold this threat over my head for the rest of my life. I could not let her win. But I also could not risk David's freedom. I picked up the manila folder from the table holding the evidence of her crimes. I needed a new plan. I needed an ally. And I had no idea that the perfect ally was about to walk right up to my front door. The panic was suffocating as I left the coffee shop. Samantha was not just a liar, she was a predator, willing to send my innocent husband to federal prison to protect her lavish lifestyle. I sat in my car gripping the steering wheel. I needed to stop this. My father was too arrogant to reason with, but my mother Brenda was different, or so I desperately wanted to believe. I convinced myself that if she understood the legal gravity of federal wire fraud and the terrifying blackmail, she would wake up. She would stop the second mortgage and force Samantha to get help. I drove straight to my parents' suburban estate, holding on to the naive hope that a mother's protective instinct would save us. I parked behind my mother's luxury SUV and walked right through the unlocked front door. I found her in the sunroom, arranging a massive bouquet of imported white roses and humming a soft classical tune. She looked the picture of suburban perfection, wearing her signature diamond stud earrings. When she saw me, her humming stopped. She let out a dramatic sigh and picked up her gardening shears. "I hope you are here to tell me you have come to your senses, Vanessa," she said without looking up. "Your father is already speaking to his lawyers, and I really do not want to see you humiliated in court." "Mom, you have to listen to me," I said, stepping into the room. I pulled out the manila folder, holding it out like a lifeline. "Samantha is lying to everyone. The medical clinic does not exist. The bank accounts are personal. Every email she sent begging for money traces back to luxury resorts." I took a deep breath, bracing myself. "Mom, I confronted her this morning. She did not even deny it." She laughed. "And when I refused to sign the mortgage, she threatened to file false federal complaints against David. She said she would accuse him of cyberstalking and have him thrown in prison. She is committing federal wire fraud, and she is going to take all of us down with her." I waited for the shears to drop from her hands. I waited for her face to drain of color. I waited for her to gasp in horror and ask me to explain. Instead, my mother calmly snipped a thorn off a white rose stem. She carefully placed the flower into the crystal vase, adjusting the petals until they were perfectly symmetrical. Then she slowly turned around to face me. Her expression was not one of shock or betrayal. It was an expression of deep, exhausting irritation. "I know, Vanessa," she said, her tone completely flat and devoid of any emotion. I stared at her, my brain struggling to process the two words she had just spoken. "You know," I repeated, the folder dropping slightly in my hands. "You know about the blackmail." My mother rolled her eyes and set the gardening shears down on the glass table. "Do not be dramatic, Vanessa," she scolded, brushing a stray leaf off her expensive blouse. "I do not know anything about this ridiculous blackmail story you have invented to make yourself the victim. What I do know is that Samantha is not a doctor. I have known since the day she was expelled from medical school 5 years ago. The floor felt like it was dropping out from underneath me. "You knew she was expelled 5 years ago," I whispered, my voice barely working. "And you let her keep pretending. You let her collect hundreds of thousands of dollars from your friends." My mother crossed her arms, looking at me as if I were a slow child who simply could not grasp the complexities of the adult world. "It is called networking, Vanessa," she explained, her voice dripping with condescension. "When Samantha lost her medical school placement, she was devastated. She was about to lose her entire social circle. All of our friends' children are surgeons and corporate executives. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it would be for this family to announce she was a college dropout? The charity was a brilliant pivot. It is a necessary business venture. It gives her a platform to maintain her elite social status and to mingle with high net worth individuals. The money she collects is just an investment in her future networking opportunities. Those people at the country club have millions of dollars to spare. They are paying for the prestige of associating with our family. It is a victimless arrangement." I felt physically sick. My own mother was actively covering up a massive federal felony to save face at the country club. She was prioritizing her perfectly curated suburban image over the law and over my safety. Mom, it is wire fraud, I pleaded, taking a step forward. It is a federal crime. If the IRS or the FBI looks into those bank accounts, you and Dad will go to prison for soliciting the funds. She is going to drag you down, and she is threatening to frame David to protect herself. You cannot let her leverage my house to fund a criminal enterprise. My mother stepped closer to me, her eyes narrowing into cold, hard slits. The only person threatening this family is you, Vanessa, she hissed. Samantha has built a beautiful narrative that elevates our family name. And you are so eaten up by jealousy, so desperate to tear down your own sister that you would dare come into my home and accuse her of being a criminal. You are ruining everything. She pointed a manicured finger toward the hallway. I will not let your petty corporate mindset destroy the social standing we have spent decades building, she commanded. If you do not sign that second mortgage tomorrow morning, I will gladly support your father in court. I will tell the judge you are financially unstable. I will tell everyone that your husband is stalking my daughter. I will protect Samantha at all costs because she actually understands the meaning of family loyalty. Now get out of my house before I call security. I stood frozen in the sunroom, surrounded by the suffocating scent of expensive roses. The realization washed over me like ice water. I was completely isolated. The people who were supposed to love and protect me were willing to sacrifice my home, my husband, and my freedom just to keep up a lie. I did not say another word. I turned around and walked out the front door, leaving the manila folder on her glass table. As I drove back to my house, the tears finally came. But they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, unfiltered rage. My family had made their choice. They had chosen the illusion, and now I was going to burn it to the ground. I drove back to my house in complete silence. The car radio was turned off, but my mind was deafeningly loud. I gripped the leather steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white and my fingers started to ache. My own mother knew. She actually knew my sister Samantha was an absolute fraud who was actively committing federal wire fraud, and she simply did not care. Even worse than that, she was perfectly willing to help Samantha destroy my husband David just to protect her precious country club reputation. The sheer weight of that profound betrayal pressed down on my chest, making it physically hard to breathe. I had spent my entire life trying to be the good daughter. I studied hard, I paid off my own debts, and I even saved their estate from foreclosure 5 years ago. And yet they were ready to throw me and my husband to the wolves just to keep up the illusion of a perfect family. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a long moment, staring through the windshield at the front door of our home. It was the home I had worked so incredibly hard to build. It was the home my parents were now trying to leverage for their own vanity. I took a deep breath, unlocked the front door, and walked inside. The house was very quiet. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. I found David sitting in the living room reviewing some digital case files on his encrypted work tablet. He looked up the moment I walked into the room, and he immediately saw the look of absolute defeat written all over my face. He put the tablet down on the side table and stood up. I walked over to the sofa and collapsed heavily into the cushions. I did not hold anything back. I told him everything that had just happened. I told him about the coffee shop confrontation, how Samantha had literally laughed at the digital evidence, and how she threatened to file a formal complaint with his federal agency to have his badge and his pension permanently revoked. Then, I told him the most painful part of the entire afternoon. I told him how I drove straight to my mother for help, only to discover she was entirely complicit in the massive lie. I fully expected David to panic. As a government investigator, his entire life and personal identity were deeply tied to his spotless professional record and his high-level security clearance. A false accusation of cyberstalking using restricted federal databases could result in an immediate suspension, an invasive internal affairs investigation, and potential criminal charges. But David did not panic at all. He sat down next to me on the sofa and took both of my hands in his. His grip was firm and reassuringly steady. He looked at me with the same analytical calmness that made him so exceptional at his job. He explained to me that we needed to be highly strategic and that we absolutely could not let my sister dictate the timeline of this conflict. David told me he would preemptively contact his department supervisor and his union representative first thing in the morning. He would file a proactive disclosure report detailing the family dispute, the financial extortion attempt, and the specific threats Samantha made against his federal credentials. By putting the situation on the official government record before she even made her move, we could establish a documented timeline of her blackmail attempt. He also calmly reminded me that he had strictly used open-source intelligence to track her charity. His agency computer logs would easily prove that he never once accessed restricted government systems to look into her fake medical clinic. He told me it would be a highly stressful battle, but we would fight it with the absolute truth. Despite his logical reassurances, the emotional toll was completely overwhelming. I leaned my head against his shoulder, fighting back the tears of frustration. My parents had given me a strict ultimatum: sign the mortgage papers by tomorrow morning, or they would publicly disown me and help Samantha completely ruin my husband. I felt incredibly isolated. I felt like I was standing entirely alone at the edge of a cliff, watching the family I grew up with slowly turn into monsters right before my eyes. We sat there in the quiet living room, trying to figure out how we were going to survive the next 24 hours without losing our home or his career. Suddenly, the heavy, somber silence of our house was violently shattered. The front doorbell rang. It was not a normal polite ring from a delivery driver or a neighbor. It was a rapid, aggressive buzzing followed immediately by loud, heavy pounding on the solid wood of the front door. The sound echoed harshly through the hallway, making me jump up from the sofa in shock. My heart started racing all over again, pounding rapidly against my ribs. I looked at the digital clock on the wall. It was late in the afternoon. I immediately assumed it was my father Richard returning with my brother Ryan. I thought they had decided not to wait the full 48 hours and were back to bully me into signing the second mortgage documents right then and there. David stood up next to me, his expression hardening into a look of sheer determination. He told me to stay in the living room while he handled whoever was at the door. But I absolutely refused to hide in my own home. I was a 33-year-old corporate auditor who faced down hostile corporate executives for a living. I was certainly not going to cower in the living room while my family tried to intimidate me into submission. I walked down the hallway right beside David, my hands balled into tight fists at my sides. The pounding on the door continued, relentless and frantic. I took a deep breath, unlocked the heavy metal deadbolt, and pulled the door wide open, fully ready to confront my father and tell him I would gladly see him in federal court. But it was not my father standing on the front porch. It was not my brother Ryan either. Standing under the warm glow of the porch light was my sister-in-law Kendra. Kendra is a sharp, no-nonsense black woman who works as a senior human resources executive for a massive tech firm downtown. She has always been the most composed and professional person in our entire extended family. She never raised her voice, she never participated in the petty family drama, and she always carried herself with an air of absolute unwavering authority. She was the one person in the family I actually respected, but the woman standing on my porch right now was completely unrecognizable. She was not wearing her usual tailored suit or her elegant pearl earrings. She was wearing loose sweatpants and an oversized college sweatshirt. Her breathing was heavy and uneven, as if she had just sprinted all the way to my house. But the most striking thing about her was her face. Kendra was visibly shaking with a quiet, terrifying rage. Her eyes were wide open and filled with a volatile mixture of profound devastation and pure, unfiltered anger. She did not say hello to me. She did not offer a polite greeting or apologize for showing up unannounced. Before I could even open my mouth to ask her what was wrong, she pushed forcefully past me, stepping right into the foyer. She marched straight down the hallway, her sneakers squeaking loudly against the hardwood floor, heading directly for the living room. David and I exchanged a completely shocked look before hurrying down the hall after her. Kendra stopped dead in the middle of our living room. She reached into the front pocket of her sweatshirt and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. Her hand was trembling so violently that the paper shook loudly in her grip. She looked at me and then she looked at David. Finally, she threw the crumpled paper onto the glass coffee table with a forceful, angry slap. The document landed face up, smoothing out just enough for me to recognize exactly what it was. It was a joint bank statement from the account she shared with my brother Ryan. Kendra crossed her arms tightly over her chest, taking a deep, shuddering breath as she struggled to control her fury. The war had just shifted dramatically, and the ultimate alliance was about to begin. I stared down at the crumpled bank statement resting on the glass coffee table. The paper was creased and damp from how tightly Kendra had been gripping it. I looked up at my sister-in-law. Kendra was a woman who commanded boardrooms and handled complex corporate disputes without breaking a sweat. To see her standing in my living room, wearing a college sweatshirt and shaking with uncontrollable anger, was entirely surreal. David stepped forward carefully, asking Kendra to sit down and offering to get her a glass of water. But Kendra shook her head sharply, refusing to take her eyes off the piece of paper on the table. She pointed a trembling finger at the bold black numbers printed near the bottom of the page. "Look at the withdrawal column," she demanded, her voice thick with emotion. "Just look at what your brother did today, Vanessa." I leaned over the table and scanned the rows of financial transactions. My training as a corporate auditor kicked in instantly. I quickly found the line item she was pointing at. It was a massive outbound wire transfer initiated just a few hours ago. The amount was exactly $50,000. The account type listed at the top made my blood run cold. It was a dedicated college savings plan. It was the fund Kendra and Ryan started for their 8-year-old son the day he was born. I looked back up at Kendra, completely stunned. Ryan drained his own son's college fund. I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, "Why would he do that?" Kendra let out a bitter, hollow laugh. "He told me he was investing it." She spat the words out like poison. I came home early from work and found him sitting at the kitchen table looking incredibly smug. When I asked him why he made such an unauthorized transfer, he told me he was investing in our family legacy. Kendra began pacing across the living room, her sneakers squeaking softly on the hardwood. She explained that Ryan proudly confessed to sending the $50,000 directly to Samantha's medical charity. He told Kendra the clinic was facing a catastrophic power failure and that he needed to step up because I had selfishly refused to sign the second mortgage. Ryan actually believed he was saving the day. He told his wife that Samantha promised to pay them back with interest once her new medical wing was fully operational, and the major wealthy donors started sending their checks. He essentially treated his own child's educational future like a high-risk venture capital loan to fund his sister's hospital. David let out a sharp sigh, running a hand over his face. Ryan had just handed $50,000 to a completely fraudulent entity. That was when the anger radiating from Kendra shifted to an absolute boil. She stopped pacing and turned to face me directly. Her eyes were burning with a fierce, protective fury that only a mother could possess. "Your family has always looked down on me, Vanessa," she said, her voice dropping to a low, steady register. "From the very first day Ryan brought me to your parents' house for dinner, I saw the way your mother looked at me. I saw the subtle microaggressions. I heard the passive-aggressive comments about my background and how hard I had to work to get to where I am. They smiled to my face, but they always treated me like an outsider who somehow infiltrated their wealthy country club circle. They tolerated me because I made good money and kept Ryan grounded, but they never respected me." Kendra took a step closer, pointing down at the bank statement again. "I put up with their elitist nonsense for nearly a decade," she continued, her voice rising with righteous indignation. "I swallowed my pride at every Thanksgiving dinner and every country club gala because I loved my husband and wanted my son to have a relationship with his grandparents. I played their high society games. But this is the absolute final straw. They crossed a line today that they can never uncross. Your brother just stole $50,000 from his own 8-year-old black son to fund the ridiculous lies of a spoiled golden child who wants to play doctor on a beach. He took money meant to guarantee my child a safe and successful future and threw it into a black hole to buy his parents' approval. Tears of absolute fury welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I am not going to let them get away with this, she declared, her voice echoing in the quiet room. I am going to tear down their entire fake philanthropic empire. I will expose Ryan. I will expose Samantha. And I will make sure everyone in their precious social circle knows exactly what kind of thieves they truly are. I do not care about the collateral damage anymore. The sheer power of her monologue left the room in stunned silence. She was entirely right. They were a family built on appearances willing to cannibalize their own, just to maintain an illusion of grandeur. But Kendra did not know the whole truth yet. She only knew that Ryan had given the money to Samantha. She did not know the charity was a complete fabrication. I looked at David and he gave me a firm, reassuring nod. I walked over to my work bag and pulled out the plain manila folder containing the digital footprint David had compiled earlier that afternoon. I set the folder down right next to the crumpled bank statement. Kendra, I said quietly, my voice steady. I need you to look at this. You are absolutely right to want to burn it all down. But you need to understand exactly what we are dealing with. Your husband did not just make a bad investment in a failing medical clinic. He wired $50,000 to a criminal enterprise. Kendra looked at me with confusion flashing across her face. She reached down and opened the manila folder. I watched her eyes quickly scan the official tax database printouts, the unregistered charity status, and the geolocation maps highlighting the luxury resorts in the Maldives and Tulum. As a senior human resources executive who dealt with corporate compliance on a daily basis, she processed the information instantly. The confusion melted away, replaced by a look of sheer, terrifying clarity. She looked up at David and then back at me. She is not running a clinic, Kendra whispered, tracing her finger over the personal routing numbers. She is just stealing the money to fund her vacations. And Ryan just gave her my son's college fund to pay for it. I nodded slowly. Yes, I replied. And when I confronted her about it this morning, she threatened to file false federal complaints against David to have him thrown in prison. Mom knows all about it, and she is helping Samantha cover it up. A slow, determined smile spread across Kendra's face. It was the smile of a woman who had just found the exact weapon she needed to win a war. She closed the manila folder and tapped her fingers against the cardboard cover. They think they are so smart, she said, her voice dangerously calm. They think they can bully an auditor, extort a federal investigator, and steal from a human resources executive without any consequences. They really picked the wrong people to mess with. Right there in the middle of my living room, the ultimate alliance was forged. We were no longer just three isolated victims of a toxic family system. We had the corporate auditor who could trace every penny. We had the digital forensic investigator who could pull the hidden electronic fingerprints. And now we had the furious mother ready to deliver the final killing blow. The countdown to their absolute destruction had officially begun. The anger in my living room had crystallized into a cold, calculated mission. Kendra sat down on the leather sofa next to me, taking a deep breath to center herself. As a senior human resources executive, she knew that emotions did not win battles, but documented evidence did. She looked at David and told him she wanted to track every single penny of that $50,000. She wanted to know exactly where her 8-year-old son's college fund had gone, and she wanted the proof printed out in black and white. I looked at David and saw the intense focus in his eyes. He opened his laptop, placing it on the glass coffee table. But before his fingers touched the keyboard, he stopped to lay out the strict ground rules. He explained that Samantha had explicitly threatened to destroy his federal career by claiming he was using restricted government databases to cyberstalk her. Because of that vicious blackmail threat, David told Kendra he could not use any of his official law enforcement software. If we were going to do this, it had to be completely above board. It had to be strictly legal, public, and undeniable. Kendra nodded, her expression hardening into absolute resolve. She pulled out her phone and logged into the online banking portal for the joint marital account she shared with Ryan. Since she was a primary account holder with equal legal rights, she had absolute authority to view and audit any transactions made from that account. She handed her unlocked phone to David, giving him full verbal authorization to act as her financial proxy. I moved my chair closer to the screen, bringing my own corporate auditing frameworks into the mix. For the next 3 hours, my living room was transformed into a financial war room. David mirrored Kendra's phone screen onto his large monitor so we could all see the digital trail clearly. The first step was isolating the specific wire transfer Ryan had initiated earlier that morning. Ryan was a wealth manager, so he thought he was incredibly smart. He had tried to obfuscate the transfer by routing it through a secondary checking account before sending it out. But to a seasoned corporate auditor like me, his attempt at money laundering was remarkably amateur. I pointed to the monitor, guiding David through the standard corporate auditing procedures I used to track embezzled funds. We followed the $50,000 from Kendra's joint savings account to the secondary checking account, and finally to the outbound wire destination. The receiving account was not registered to an international aid organization or a charitable trust. The routing number traced back to a domestic corporate account owned by a limited liability company registered in the state of Delaware. I explained to Kendra that Delaware is notorious for having incredibly strict corporate secrecy laws. People who want to hide their assets often set up shell companies there because the state does not publicly list the names of the business owners. Samantha thought she had built an impenetrable wall. She thought she could funnel the stolen donation money into this anonymous shell company and make it disappear. But she severely underestimated what happens when you cross a forensic investigator and an auditor. While Delaware does not publish the names of the company owners, they do require public filings for major asset purchases involving debt or collateral. David started pulling public business registry documents and uniform commercial code filings associated with that specific Delaware company. He did not need a federal warrant to access these documents. They were available to anyone with an internet connection and the patience to dig through state archives. It took him 45 minutes of cross-referencing tax identification numbers and public property records. Then suddenly the rapid clicking of his mouse stopped. David let out a low, sharp whistle. He dragged a digital document from his secondary monitor to the main screen so Kendra and I could read it. It was a public lien registry document filed just 3 days ago. The shell company that had just received $50,000 of Kendra's stolen money had recently made a massive purchase. They had not bought life-saving antibiotics or emergency vaccines for suffering children. The company had purchased a brand-new, fully loaded Porsche Macan. The purchase price was over $90,000. The $50,000 Ryan stole from his son's college fund was the exact amount used to cover the massive down payment on the luxury sports car. Kendra let out a sound that was half gasp and half scream. Her hands flew to her mouth as she stared at the vehicle identification number printed on the screen. Ryan gave away our son's entire future just to buy his sister a sports car, she whispered, her voice shaking with absolute disgust. But the most damning piece of evidence was yet to come. David scrolled down to the very bottom of the vehicle registration document. Because the car was purchased through a corporate entity, the dealership required a primary driver to be listed on the insurance paperwork for liability purposes. David highlighted the name printed on the bottom line. It was not Samantha's name, it was the name of a man. I recognized the name immediately. It was a guy named Bryce. Samantha had dated him briefly a few years ago, but she told our parents they had broken up because he did not share her profound philanthropic values. Our parents had praised her for sacrificing her personal life for the greater good. But it turned out Samantha had never broken up with him at all. She had simply hidden him from the family to maintain her image as a selfless saint. Her secret boyfriend was the primary driver of the Porsche Macan bought and paid for with stolen college funds. We sat back and looked at the mountain of evidence glowing brightly on the computer screen. The trap was now fully loaded. We had the public tax records proving the charity was fake. We had the internet addresses proving she was vacationing at luxury resorts. We had Kendra's legal bank statements proving Ryan committed financial theft against his own child. And now we had the public vehicle registration proving the stolen money went directly to a luxury sports car. Most importantly, we had obtained every single piece of this evidence legally. David had not used a single restricted government database. He had used his wife's authorization, open-source public records, and standard auditing practices. Samantha's threat to blackmail David and destroy his federal career was completely neutralized. She had absolutely no leverage left. If she went to his agency with false claims, he had a perfectly documented legal paper trail to prove she was just a desperate criminal trying to extort a federal agent. Kendra stood up from the sofa. Her tears were gone, entirely replaced by a terrifying calm. She smoothed down the front of her sweatshirt. She looked at me and asked when my parents were hosting their big charity gala to raise more money for the fake clinic. I told her it was this Saturday night at the boutique hotel downtown. Kendra nodded slowly, a cold, determined smile spreading across her face. "We are going to that gala," she announced, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "And we are going to show all of their wealthy friends exactly what they are paying for." The very next morning, the mail carrier dropped a thick envelope into my mailbox. It was made of heavy cream-colored cardstock, sealed with custom gold wax. I opened it to find a lavish invitation to a charity gala hosted by my parents. The venue was the grand ballroom of the most expensive boutique hotel in the city. The invitation proudly announced their ambitious goal to raise an additional $200,000 to build a new pediatric wing for Samantha's overseas medical clinic. The sheer audacity of it was completely breathtaking. My parents were actually spending tens of thousands of dollars on imported caviar and vintage champagne to solicit even more money from their wealthy friends. They were completely doubling down on the massive lie. I handed the thick invitation to Kendra, who just shook her head in absolute disgust. My parents were essentially hosting a massive federal fraud event and inviting the entire high society of the city to participate in it. While we were examining the extravagant invitation, Kendra's phone buzzed loudly on the coffee table. She picked it up and her eyes immediately narrowed into a fierce, unforgiving glare. It was a text message from her husband Ryan. Even though he had just secretly stolen $50,000 from their own child's college fund, he still had the absolute nerve to speak to her like she was his subordinate. Ryan told her he would be arriving at the hotel early with my parents to help set up the donation tables. He explicitly instructed Kendra to arrive by 7 o'clock and patronizingly told her to please dress appropriately and try not to make a scene in front of his important wealth management clients. He actually told his brilliant, successful corporate executive wife to stay quiet and look pretty while he paraded around as a philanthropic hero using the money he stole from their son. Kendra did not text him back. She just locked her screen and set the phone down gently. She looked at me with a terrifyingly calm smile and said she was going to wear her absolute best designer dress. She was going to look entirely flawless when she burned his entire world to the ground. A few minutes later, my own phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out to see a new message from Samantha. There was no text attached to the message, just a single high-resolution photograph. It was a picture of a digital clock ticking down. It was her psychological warfare tactic, designed to remind me of the 48-hour ultimatum she had given me. She was reminding me of her vicious threat to file false federal complaints against David if I did not sign over the second mortgage on my house. She wanted me to feel the panic setting in. She wanted me to imagine federal agents raiding my home and taking my husband away in handcuffs. Yesterday, that picture would have sent me into a complete tailspin of crippling anxiety. Yesterday, I would have been crying and calling lawyers trying to figure out how to survive her extortion. But today, Sitting in my living room, with the undeniable proof of her crimes sitting right on my coffee table, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, powerful anticipation. I did not reply to her threatening message. I simply deleted the notification and turned my phone on silent. I looked at David and Kendra. The time for feeling intimidated was officially over. We spent the rest of the evening transforming my home office into a highly strategic war room. We were not just going to confront my toxic family in private anymore. My parents had decided to make this a public spectacle, so we were going to give them exactly the kind of unforgettable show they deserved. But to do that, we needed our presentation to be absolutely flawless and legally untouchable. David sat at his large dual-monitor setup and began organizing the digital evidence. I pulled up my corporate auditing software to structure the complex financial data so that anyone, even people without a financial background, could understand the theft immediately. We started with the absolute foundation of the lie. David formatted the official search results from the Internal Revenue Service database, showing in bold red letters that Samantha's charity did not exist as a registered tax-exempt organization. Next, I created a clean, easy-to-read spreadsheet tracking the flow of the donation money. I clearly documented the routing numbers showing how the funds bypassed any organizational accounts and went straight into her personal bank account. Then we tackled the stolen college fund. Kendra legally exported the official bank statements from her joint account. I highlighted the exact date and time Ryan initiated the $50,000 wire transfer. We placed that banking document right next to the Delaware Corporate Registry filings. We created a crystal-clear visual timeline connecting the stolen college money directly to the purchase of the $90,000 Porsche Macan. We made sure the name of her secret boyfriend was highlighted in bright yellow on the vehicle registration and the insurance liability forms. Finally, David imported the global geolocation map. He placed the bright red pins over the luxury resorts in the Maldives, Tulum, and Ibiza, right next to the desperate begging emails she had sent from those exact locations on those exact dates. Every single piece of evidence was cross-referenced, verified, and completely legal. David did not use a single restricted government tool to find this information. We had built an ironclad case using nothing but open-source intelligence public records and authorized marital bank statements. When we were completely satisfied with the formatting, David transferred the entire presentation onto a single encrypted flash drive. He held the small metal drive in his hand, feeling the heavy weight of what it contained. This tiny device held the absolute power to destroy decades of carefully curated social climbing and expose a massive federal crime. We spent the next 2 days preparing ourselves mentally for the upcoming gala. We did not answer any phone calls from my parents. We ignored the escalating, passive-aggressive text messages from Ryan. We simply let them believe they were winning. We let them believe their intimidation tactics had worked and that I was staying silent out of fear. By Saturday afternoon, the tension in my house was thick enough to cut with a knife. Kendra arrived at my house early so we could get ready together. True to her word, she was wearing a stunning floor-length emerald green gown that looked like it belonged on a red carpet. I chose a sleek, tailored black dress that made me feel like I was wearing impenetrable armor. David wore his sharpest dark suit, looking every bit the formidable federal investigator that he was. We stood in my hallway looking at each other. There was no fear left in any of us. We were a completely united front. We walked out the front door and got into the car, heading straight for the boutique hotel. The invitation to the slaughter had been accepted, and we were ready to deliver. The grand ballroom of the downtown boutique hotel was a masterclass in superficial elegance. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden glow over the room. Waiters in crisp black tuxedos moved gracefully through the crowd, balancing silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of vintage champagne and tiny porcelain plates of imported caviar. The room was packed to the brim with the most elite members of our city's high society. There were prominent local politicians, wealthy corporate lawyers and highly respected doctors mingling and laughing. They were all completely oblivious to the fact that they had been invited to participate in a massive financial fraud. David, Kendra, and I stepped through the heavy double doors, moving as a completely united front. We did not look like victims. We looked like a corporate execution squad. Kendra walked with her head held high, her emerald green gown catching the light with every step. I stayed close to David, feeling the reassuring weight of the encrypted flash drive securely tucked inside my small black clutch. We barely had a moment to take in the audacity of the event before my family launched their first tactical strike. My mother Brenda and my brother Ryan immediately spotted us. They abandoned their conversation and marched directly toward us with a painfully obvious strategy. They wanted to divide and conquer, to isolate Kendra and me so we could not support each other. Ryan reached us first, plastering a fake, charming smile across his face. He grabbed Kendra's arm with a grip that was too tight. "There is my beautiful wife," he announced loudly. "Come on, Kendra. I need to introduce you to the senior partners at my firm." He tried to pull her away, forcing her into the role of the quiet, supportive spouse. Kendra did not resist. She looked at Ryan with a perfectly serene smile that completely masked her absolute fury. "I will be right there, darling," she said, her voice smooth as glass. She shot me a quick, knowing look before walking away. As soon as she was out of earshot, my mother turned to me. She looked me up and down, analyzing my dress with a dismissive smirk. "I am glad you decided to show up, Vanessa," she whispered, her tone dripping with passive-aggressive venom. "Try not to look so miserable. Your sister is doing something beautiful tonight. Do not embarrass us." She turned and glided away. David leaned in close and whispered that he was going to find the audio-visual booth to discreetly assess the equipment. I nodded and made my way toward the marble bar tucked into the far corner of the ballroom. I ordered sparkling water and leaned against the cool stone counter, watching the room. It did not take long for my father Richard to find me. He materialized beside me, holding a glass of expensive scotch. He carried himself with the supreme arrogance of a man who firmly believed he held all the cards. He took a slow sip of his drink and leaned his elbow on the bar, trapping me in the corner. "Well, Vanessa," he said, his voice incredibly patronizing, "your 48 hours are officially up. I am very relieved you finally came to your senses. It takes a big person to admit when they are wrong." I kept my face entirely neutral, taking a sip of my water. He reached inside his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a sleek silver fountain pen, laying it right next to my glass. "I have the second mortgage documents in my briefcase," he continued, a victorious smile spreading across his face. "As soon as your sister finishes her speech, we are going to walk into the hallway and you are going to sign the papers. Then we can finally put this ridiculous tantrum behind us." I looked at the pen and then up at my father. "You are very confident, Dad," I said, my voice steady. He chuckled, taking another sip of his scotch. "I am confident because I know you, Vanessa. You do not have the stomach for a public fight. You always fold when the pressure gets too high." He patted my shoulder in a condescending manner. "Enjoy the champagne, sweetie. Get ready to sign." He turned and walked away, leaving the pen on the bar. I left the silver pen exactly where it was and walked toward the center of the ballroom as the main overhead lights slowly began to dim. A single bright spotlight illuminated a raised stage at the front of the room. The low murmur of the crowd fell into a respectful silence. My mother walked up to the microphone, tapping it gently. "Thank you all for coming," she announced, her voice echoing with manufactured humility. "Tonight we are here to honor a true hero. Please welcome my brilliant daughter, Dr. Samantha." The ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. I watched as Samantha gracefully stepped out from behind a velvet curtain and walked up to the microphone. The sheer level of hypocrisy on display was absolutely suffocating. She was wearing a stunning, floor-length designer gown covered in hand-stitched silk embroidery. It was a dress I recognized from a high-end boutique downtown. It cost at least $3,000. She was wearing thousands of dollars worth of luxury fashion to stand in front of wealthy people and beg for money for starving children. Samantha gripped the edges of the wooden podium and looked out at the audience with a deeply sorrowful expression. It is so hard to be standing here in this beautiful room surrounded by all of this luxury when my heart is thousands of miles away in the dirt and the mud. She began, her voice trembling perfectly. Just 2 days ago, our clinic suffered a catastrophic power failure. I held a malnourished child in my arms as the medical monitors went dark. I thought we were going to lose everything. She paused, reaching up to wipe a single perfectly timed tear from her cheek. I scanned the room. The doctors, lawyers, and politicians were completely captivated. Ryan was standing near the front with his arm wrapped tightly around Kendra, nodding solemnly. He honestly believed his stolen $50,000 was the reason those fake medical monitors turned back on. My parents stood off to the side, beaming with absolute pride. But thanks to the incredible generosity of my family, and hopefully the generous pledges from all of you tonight, that child will live, Samantha continued, her voice rising with triumphant emotional intensity. I cannot do this without you. Please help me save them. The audience rose to their feet, delivering a massive standing ovation. People were already reaching into their tailored jackets to pull out their checkbooks. Samantha stood in the spotlight, bathing in the adoration. She thought she was completely untouchable. I looked across the dark room and made eye contact with Kendra. Her face was a mask of cold, hard stone. Then I looked toward the back of the room. David was standing right next to the audio-visual control booth. He caught my eye and gave me a single, firm nod. My father's words echoed in my head. He thought I did not have the stomach for a public fight. I took a deep breath, gripped my small black clutch, and started walking directly toward the stage. The performance was over, and the absolute truth was about to take the microphone. Samantha stood bathed in the warm glow of the spotlight, letting the applause wash over her. She gripped the edges of the wooden podium and leaned forward, her face the absolute picture of manufactured tragic beauty. She waited perfectly still until the clapping began to die down before she delivered her final plea. We have a goal tonight, she said, her voice soft and fragile, carrying through the silent ballroom. We need to raise $200,000 to build the new pediatric wing and replace the failing generators. Every single dollar you give tonight will go directly to saving a life. I am asking you to look into your hearts and give whatever you can. Please help me bring these children back into the light. The audience responded exactly how she had trained them to. The wealthy guests immediately began reaching into their tailored suit jackets and expensive designer clutches. The soft rustling sound of checkbooks being opened echoed across the room. I looked over at my parents, Richard and Brenda. They were standing near the front of the stage, absolutely beaming with pride. My mother had her hands clasped together in front of her chest, wiping away a fake tear of joy. My father was nodding at his wealthy friends, encouraging them to write larger numbers on their checks. They thought they had orchestrated the perfect evening. They thought they had successfully manipulated the entire room into funding Samantha's luxury lifestyle while painting themselves as local philanthropists. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the cool air of the ballroom fill my lungs. I set my glass of sparkling water down on the marble bar. I smoothed down the front of my tailored black dress. I did not feel any fear, anxiety, or hesitation. The 48 hours of emotional torture they had put me through had completely burned away any lingering childhood insecurities. I let go of the edge of the bar and started walking toward the stage. The ballroom was massive, but my footsteps felt incredibly deliberate. The soft clicking of my heels on the polished wood floor was drowned out by the low hum of the guests discussing their donations. As I moved closer to the center of the room, a few people noticed me and stepped aside. I kept my eyes locked on the wooden steps leading up to the side of the stage. My brother Ryan was the first one from my family to see me approaching. He was standing near the front row of tables holding a glass of scotch. He nudged my father and pointed toward me. I watched my father's face change from confusion to a bright, triumphant smile. He leaned over and whispered something to my mother. She turned to look at me, her face lighting up with victorious smugness. They honestly thought I was walking up there to surrender. They genuinely believed that the pressure of the wealthy crowd and the threat of their federal blackmail had successfully broken me. They assumed I was walking up to the microphone to publicly pledge the $150,000 second mortgage on my house. My father even gave me an encouraging nod as I walked past his table, assuming I was about to secure their family legacy. I reached the wooden steps at the side of the stage and began to walk up. The floorboards creaked slightly under my weight. Samantha was still standing at the podium holding the microphone and thanking a few prominent guests in the front row. When she saw me step onto the stage out of the corner of her eye, she paused. She turned her head and looked at me. For a fraction of a second, there was a flash of panic in her eyes. But then she looked down at the crowd, saw our smiling parents, and immediately relaxed. Her panic vanished, replaced by the most arrogant, smug smirk I had ever seen. Samantha thought I was terrified. She thought the ticking clock picture she sent me earlier had worked perfectly. She stepped back from the wooden podium, holding her hand out gracefully to welcome me to the center of the stage. She even leaned in close as I approached the microphone. Her expensive vanilla perfume filled the space between us. "I am so glad you finally decided to do the right thing, sweetie," she whispered, her voice dripping with venomous condescension, just low enough so the audience could not hear her. She stepped aside, leaving me standing alone in the bright heat of the spotlight. I looked out over the massive ballroom. Hundreds of faces were staring back at me. I could see the prominent local politicians, the corporate lawyers, and the wealthy doctors holding their open checkbooks. I could see Kendra standing near the back, her emerald green dress standing out in the dim light, her expression perfectly stoic. And I saw my parents standing in the front row waiting for me to hand over my financial security to fund their lie. I reached out and tapped the top of the microphone with my index finger. The hollow thumping sound echoed loudly through the entire ballroom, instantly capturing the attention of every single person in the room. The murmuring completely stopped. The rustling of checkbooks ceased entirely. The room fell dead silent, waiting for my grand surrender. I leaned forward, bringing my mouth close to the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice perfectly steady and clear, ringing out with absolute authority. "My name is Vanessa, and I am Samantha's younger sister. My parents, Richard and Brenda, have spoken tonight about the importance of family philanthropy. They have asked you to trust them." I paused, letting the silence stretch out for a few agonizing seconds. I looked directly down at my father. His triumphant smile faltered slightly, a tiny crack of doubt appearing in his confident facade. Samantha shifted uncomfortably behind me. As a corporate auditor, I deal with financial transparency every single day. I continued, my voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. "And because you are all preparing to write very generous checks tonight, I believe you deserve absolute transparency. I believe you have the right to know exactly where every single dollar of your hard-earned money is going. So before anyone signs a check, I have put together a very special presentation for all of you tonight." As the words left my mouth, the focus of the room shifted. At the very back of the ballroom, standing quietly inside the darkened audio-visual control booth, David made his move. He reached forward and plugged the encrypted metal flash drive directly into the main system console. He bypassed the hotel's default screensaver and routed our financial war room directly to the main projector. High above my head, the massive mechanical gears of the projector screen began to hum. The enormous white canvas slowly lowered itself from the ceiling, descending right behind me and Samantha. The wealthy crowd watched in curious anticipation, while my family stared in growing horror. The mechanical hum of the massive projector screen descending from the ceiling echoed through the silent ballroom. Everyone in the room turned their attention to the front, expecting to see heartbreaking images of a struggling medical clinic. The wealthy doctors and corporate lawyers had their checkbooks open and pens ready. My parents, Richard and Brenda, stood in the front row, their faces glowing with immense pride. Samantha stood just a few feet away from me on the stage, wearing her $3,000 designer gown, acting like a martyred saint. She thought I was projecting a family montage or a financial pledge document. The heavy white canvas finally locked into place with a loud click. At the back of the room, inside the darkened audio-visual control booth, David pressed a single button on his laptop. A bright beam of light shot across the ballroom, cutting through the darkness and hitting the massive 20-foot screen. But the image that appeared was not a dilapidated hospital in a remote village. It was not a group of malnourished children waiting for antibiotics. The high-definition video filled the screen in brilliant color, instantly shattering the illusion my family had spent years building. Instead of a medical emergency, the screen displayed a vibrant, sun-drenched ocean. The crystal-clear waters sparkled under the Mediterranean sun. Suddenly, Samantha appeared on the massive screen wearing a tiny designer bikini and oversized luxury sunglasses. She was standing on the expansive teakwood deck of a massive multi-million-dollar private yacht. The loud thumping bass of European club music pumped through the ballroom's surround sound system, completely replacing the solemn atmosphere of the charity gala. On the screen, Samantha laughed loudly, tossing her perfectly styled hair back as she held a massive golden bottle of expensive champagne. She shook the bottle vigorously and popped the cork, spraying the expensive vintage alcohol all over the deck of the yacht and her laughing friends. Gasps of absolute shock erupted from the wealthy guests sitting at the tables. The sound of leather checkbooks snapping shut echoed across the large room. I looked down at my parents in the front row. The triumphant smiles had completely vanished from their faces. My father dropped his jaw, staring at the screen in pure disbelief. My mother brought a trembling hand to her mouth. They had absolutely no idea what they were looking at. I leaned into the microphone, keeping my voice incredibly calm and authoritative. The video playing behind me was taken exactly 14 months ago in Ibiza, Spain, I announced. The high-definition footage continued to loop, showing Samantha dancing on the luxury yacht without a single care in the world. I looked out at the audience, scanning the faces of the wealthy donors who were now staring at the stage in absolute horror. I asked David to advance to the next slide. The screen split perfectly in half. On the left side, the Ibiza yacht video continued to play with the digital date and timestamp highlighted in bright yellow. On the right side of the screen, a large text email appeared. It was an exact copy of the frantic emergency newsletter Samantha had sent to everyone in this very room on that exact same day. I read the text of the email aloud into the microphone. It says the clinic generator has failed, and we are losing patients to the extreme heat. I am covered in dirt and exhausted, but I refuse to give up. Please send whatever funds you can spare immediately to save these innocent lives. The sheer hypocrisy of her own words echoing over the footage of her spraying champagne on a private yacht was absolutely devastating. The room erupted into angry whispers. People were pointing at the screen, shaking their heads, and looking at my parents with intense disgust. Samantha lunged toward the podium, her face turning a bright, violent shade of red. "Turn it off!" she screamed, her voice cracking in sudden panic. "Turn that screen off right now!" But I did not flinch, and I did not step away from the microphone. David clicked to the next slide. The screen displayed another side-by-side comparison. This time, the video on the left showed Samantha lounging in a private infinity pool at a 5-star boutique hotel in Tulum, Mexico. The email on the right was dated the exact same day, begging for emergency funds because the roof of her supposed medical clinic had allegedly collapsed in a severe tropical storm. I read that email aloud as well, highlighting how she claimed she was sleeping on the muddy floor, while the video clearly showed her sipping a brightly colored cocktail from a freshly cut coconut. The entire philanthropic grift was completely exposed. The wealthy donors sitting in the audience were no longer just shocked. They were completely furious. These were highly successful and intelligent people who did not take kindly to being treated like gullible fools. Several doctors in the front row stood up from their chairs, throwing their blank checks onto the tables in absolute disgust. My brother Ryan, who had secretly stolen his own son's college fund to pay this woman, stood completely frozen, staring at the screen like his entire world had just collapsed. I tapped the microphone again, demanding the room's attention for the final piece of evidence. You might be wondering how a dedicated medical professional has the time to take so many luxury vacations, I said, my voice carrying over the angry murmurs. The answer is incredibly simple. She is not a doctor. David changed the slide one last time. A formal letterhead appeared on the massive screen. It was an official administrative document from the University Medical School. I read the bold text at the center of the page. It was a formal notice of expulsion. It clearly stated that Samantha had been permanently dismissed from the medical program exactly 5 years ago. The ultimate revelation hit the elegant ballroom like a massive physical shockwave. Samantha was not just mismanaging charity funds. Her entire identity was a complete and utter fabrication. She had never been a doctor. She had never opened a clinic. She had been living a massive lie for half a decade, funding her lavish lifestyle by extorting the generosity of our parents' wealthy friends. Samantha completely lost her mind. She abandoned her fake saintly persona and let out a piercing aggressive scream. She gathered the heavy silk fabric of her $3,000 designer gown and jumped off the side of the stage. She sprinted down the center aisle toward the back of the ballroom, heading straight for the audio-visual control booth. "Shut the power off!" she shrieked, pointing frantically at the hotel technician sitting inside the booth. "I will sue you if you do not shut it down." The technician looked terrified and reached for the main power switch, but David was already there. He stepped directly in front of the control board, crossing his arms over his chest. He stood there like an immovable brick wall, completely blocking the technician and Samantha from touching the equipment. The truth was shining brightly, and no one was going to turn it off. The entire ballroom was in a state of absolute chaos. Samantha was screaming at the back of the room, desperately trying to get past David, but he stood like a fortress blocking the audio-visual booth. Down in the front row, my father Richard finally snapped out of his stunned paralysis. The polished country club facade he had maintained for decades completely melted away, revealing the volatile, aggressive man underneath. His face turned a deep, violent shade of crimson. He threw his expensive crystal glass of scotch onto the floor, shattering it against the polished hardwood. He pointed a trembling finger at me and began storming toward the wooden stairs of the stage. He was shouting at the top of his lungs, ordering me to step away from the microphone and demanding that I show some respect for the family. He intended to physically pull me off the stage to stop the presentation. But before his foot could even touch the first wooden step, a figure moved seamlessly out of the shadows and blocked his path. It was Kendra. She stepped directly between my furious father and the stage stairs. Her emerald green designer gown swept across the floor, making her look completely regal and untouchable. She did not flinch as my father loomed over her. She simply looked him dead in the eye with an expression so intensely cold and authoritative that he actually froze in his tracks. "Do not take another step, Richard," she warned, her voice low but carrying a terrifying weight. "This presentation is not over yet." Leaving my father completely paralyzed with shock, Kendra gracefully walked up the stairs and joined me in the center of the bright spotlight. I gladly stepped aside and handed the microphone to my sister-in-law. If the audience thought my revelation about the fake medical clinic was shocking, they were completely unprepared for the absolute destruction Kendra was about to unleash. She held the microphone with a steady hand. She did not yell. She did not cry. She possessed absolute ice in her veins. She looked out over the sea of wealthy guests, and her eyes immediately locked onto her husband. Ryan was standing near the front tables, completely trembling. All of his arrogant swagger had evaporated. He looked like a terrified little boy caught in a massive lie. But Kendra was not just looking at Ryan. She specifically shifted her gaze to the large table right next to him. That table was entirely occupied by the senior partners, the managing directors, and the wealthy clients from Ryan's prestigious wealth management firm. They were the very people Ryan had spent years trying to impress. Kendra took a deep breath and spoke into the microphone. Her voice was smooth, clear, and devastatingly precise. "Good evening, everyone," she said. "For those who do not know me, my name is Kendra, and I am the wife of Ryan, the man standing right there who has been proudly playing the role of the generous philanthropic brother tonight." She paused, letting the entire room focus their attention directly on Ryan. He physically shrank under the weight of hundreds of staring eyes. Kendra looked toward the back of the room and gave David a subtle nod. The massive projector screen behind us shifted instantly. The university expulsion letter vanished and was replaced by a high-definition image of a formal banking document. The logo of a major national bank was clearly visible at the top. "I want you all to look very closely at the screen," Kendra instructed the audience. "What you are looking at is a legally obtained joint bank statement. More specifically, it is the transaction history for a dedicated college savings account that I set up for our 8-year-old son." Gasps rippled through the audience once again as people began to realize what they were looking at. Kendra pointed to a specific highlighted line item on the massive screen. "Earlier today, my husband Ryan secretly liquidated $50,000 from his own child's educational trust fund," she announced, her voice ringing with undeniable power. "He authorized an immediate wire transfer without my knowledge or consent. When I confronted him about stealing from his own son, he looked me in the eye and told me he had generously donated the money to his sister's urgent medical charity. He told me he was saving lives." The senior partners from Ryan's wealth management firm stared at him in absolute disgust. In the financial sector, stealing money from a trust fund, even a personal one, is the ultimate cardinal sin. Ryan's career was effectively burning to ashes right in front of his eyes. He shook his head frantically, mouthing the word no, but no one was listening to him. But as Vanessa has just so brilliantly proven, Kendra continued, the medical clinic does not exist. So that begs the question, where exactly did my son's $50,000 go? Did it go to medical supplies? Did it go to a failing generator? Absolutely not. She looked at David one last time. David clicked the keyboard and the final slide illuminated the ballroom. The screen split to show two documents side by side. On the left was a Delaware Limited Liability Company registry tracking the $50,000 wire transfer. On the right was a high-resolution photograph of a brand-new fully loaded luxury vehicle accompanied by its official dealership registration paperwork. "It went to this," Kendra stated, her voice dropping like a heavy hammer. "It went to a $90,000 Porsche Macan. The stolen money was used to cover the massive down payment on a luxury sports car registered to Samantha's secret boyfriend. My husband Ryan stole $50,000 from a black child's future to buy a sports car for a fake doctor." The reaction from the crowd was instantaneous and explosive. The horrific reality of the massive scam finally hit the wealthy donors. They had not just been lied to about a medical clinic, they had been actively lured into a criminal money laundering scheme involving stolen college funds. Total pandemonium broke out across the ballroom. The polite silence of high society was completely shattered by shouts of anger and betrayal. Guests did not just walk out, they immediately grabbed their phones. Dozens of highly influential doctors, lawyers, and local politicians were aggressively dialing their banks right there in the middle of the dining room. I could hear powerful voices shouting into their phones, demanding immediate stop payment orders on the checks they had written just moments ago. People were ripping up their pledge cards and throwing the pieces onto the expensive floral centerpieces. The carefully curated social standing my parents had spent 30 years building was completely annihilated in less than 10 minutes. The wealthy elite of the city were treating my family like highly contagious pariahs. Kendra stood next to me in the spotlight, her head held high, watching her toxic husband's world completely fall apart. The kill shot had been delivered with absolute perfection, and the sheer satisfaction of the moment was completely intoxicating. The grand ballroom completely devolved into absolute chaos. The elegant veneer of the charity gala was shattered, replaced by the deafening roar of betrayed high society donors. Wealthy doctors and corporate lawyers were standing up from their tables, shouting over one another and frantically pulling out their cell phones to cancel their massive checks. Kendra stood beside me on the stage, her emerald green gown shimmering as she looked out at the destruction she had just righteously unleashed upon her husband. Down in the front row, my mother Brenda completely lost whatever grip she had left on reality. She could not process that her golden child was a complete fraud. Instead, she directed all of her blinding rage entirely at me. She pushed past a furious local politician and stormed right up to the edge of the stage. Her face was contorted with absolute hatred, and her expensive diamond earrings shook violently as she screamed at the top of her lungs. "You are a jealous, pathological liar!" she shrieked, her voice cracking over the noise of the chaotic room. "You doctored those banking photos because you could never stand to see your sister succeed. You are trying to destroy this family because you are dead inside." I looked down at my mother, feeling absolutely no pity for her. She was still trying to gaslight me right in the middle of a burning room. I did not even bother to respond to her frantic screaming because the real threat was already sprinting back toward the stage. Samantha had realized that she could not get past David at the audio-visual booth. He was an immovable wall of federal authority, and the truth was still beaming brightly onto the massive 20-foot screen behind me. Her fake saintly persona was entirely gone, replaced by the panicked desperation of a cornered criminal. She gathered the hem of her $3,000 silk designer gown and marched back down the center aisle, pushing past the angry donors. She climbed the wooden stairs of the stage, stomping toward me with her hands balled into tight fists. She stopped just inches from my face, panting heavily, her eyes wide and completely unhinged. "You are dead, Vanessa," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper, meant only for me. "Turn that screen off right now, or I swear to God, I will end your husband. I will call his agency tonight and tell them he used restricted federal databases to cyberstalk me. I will tell them he is obsessed with me and hacked my accounts. I will have his badge, his pension, and his freedom stripped away before the morning. You think you won, but you just sent David to a federal penitentiary." She smiled a sick, twisted smile, thinking she still held the ultimate trump card. She honestly believed her malicious blackmail was going to force me to apologize and retract everything in front of the entire ballroom. She thought I would cower to protect the man I loved. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at my sister with absolute, complete indifference. I reached into my small black clutch and pulled out a thick, folded manila envelope. I calmly reached out and pressed the heavy envelope directly against her chest, forcing her to take it. She looked down at it, her sick smile beginning to waver. I raised the microphone back up to my mouth, projecting my voice over the chaotic shouting of the crowded ballroom. "This is not a petty family dispute over a house mortgage anymore, Samantha," I announced, my voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. "Soliciting funds across state lines under the guise of a tax-exempt charity that does not exist is not just lying to mom and dad. It is the textbook definition of federal wire fraud." I watched the color completely drain from her face as the legal reality of my words finally hit her. "And as for your little threat against my husband," I continued, speaking loud enough for my parents to hear every single word, "you can make all the phone calls you want. Inside that envelope is the documented proof of how we obtained every piece of evidence shown on this screen tonight. David did not use a single government database. We used open-source public tax records, public vehicle registrations, and Kendra's completely legal access to her own joint marital bank accounts. You have absolutely no leverage left, Samantha. Your blackmail is completely useless, and your entire philanthropic empire is nothing but a massive federal crime scene." Samantha stared at me, her mouth slightly open, unable to form a single coherent word. The heavy manila envelope trembled in her hands. Down in the front row, my mother Brenda finally stopped screaming. She looked at Samantha, waiting for her golden child to defend herself, waiting for her to provide some brilliant explanation that would save their family legacy. But Samantha just stood there, completely paralyzed by the sheer weight of her own actions. Ryan was sitting in a chair with his head in his hands, utterly defeated, and my father Richard stood frozen, looking like a man who had just realized his entire life was a pathetic joke. Then a loud, heavy sound cut through the remaining noise in the room. The massive double doors at the main entrance of the ballroom were suddenly pushed wide open. The room fell into a stunned silence. Standing in the doorway framed by the bright lights of the hotel lobby were 6 uniformed police officers. They stepped into the grand ballroom, their hands resting casually on their duty belts. 3 different furious donors, highly influential people who refused to be scammed, had bypassed the hotel security and called the authorities directly. One of the prominent corporate lawyers in the front row stood up and pointed a steady finger directly at the stage. The trap had officially snapped completely shut. No more running. It was over. 6 months have passed since that explosive night at the boutique hotel. The absolute chaos that erupted in the grand ballroom was only the very beginning of the relentless consequences my family would face. When the police walked through those heavy double doors, the illusion my parents had spent their entire lives building shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The wealthy donors did not just cancel their checks. They filed formal police reports for fraud. Within a week, the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation opened a joint investigation into the fake medical charity. The digital evidence David and I provided completely dismantled any defense they tried to build. Today, Samantha is sitting in a federal holding facility awaiting her final sentencing. She is facing a minimum of 5 years in federal prison for multiple counts of wire fraud and tax evasion. During her hearings, she tried to use her fake tears and manipulative charm on the federal judge, but he was completely immune to her performance. The secret boyfriend she bought the luxury sports car for abandoned her the second the authorities started asking questions, leaving her to face the criminal charges entirely alone. The golden child finally met a reality she could not manipulate. The fallout for my parents was equally devastating, though their punishment came in the form of absolute financial and social ruin. Richard and Brenda, the proud socialites who valued their country club reputation above their own daughter's safety, lost absolutely everything. When the criminal investigation went public, the wealthy friends they had lied to turned on them with a vengeance. Several prominent doctors and lawyers threatened them with massive civil lawsuits for soliciting fraudulent donations. To avoid being sued into complete oblivion, my parents were forced to liquidate all of their major assets, to pay restitution, and to afford the exorbitant legal fees for Samantha's criminal defense attorneys. They had to sell the beautiful family estate. The very same house they tried to force me to leverage with a second mortgage was sold at a massive loss just to keep them out of bankruptcy court. Today, my parents live in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the industrial outskirts of the city. Their memberships to the exclusive country club were permanently revoked. The people they spent decades trying to impress now treat them like absolute pariahs, crossing the street to avoid speaking to them. Their social exile is a prison of their own making. My brother Ryan received his own swift and brutal dose of karma. Kendra did not waste a single second after the charity gala. She filed for divorce the very next morning, serving him with papers before he could even attempt to formulate an apology. With the undeniable proof that he had stolen $50,000 from their own son's educational trust fund, the family court judge showed him absolutely no mercy. Kendra was granted full legal and physical custody of their 8-year-old son. Furthermore, the court ordered an aggressive wage garnishment from Ryan's paychecks to ensure every single penny of that stolen money was returned to the college fund. But the professional consequences for Ryan were even worse. News of his financial theft spread through his prestigious wealth management firm like wildfire. You cannot work in high-level finance when you are caught stealing trust funds. He was immediately fired and stripped of his financial licenses. He now works a miserable entry-level administrative job, barely making enough to cover his rent and his court-ordered restitutions. He gave up his family and his future to buy his fraudulent sister a sports car, and now he has absolutely nothing to show for it. In stark contrast to the absolute ruin my toxic family brought upon themselves, my life has never been more incredibly peaceful. Cutting ties with them was the hardest but most liberating decision I have ever made. I no longer spend my days waiting for the next manipulation or the next demand for my money. I am no longer the scapegoat for their failures. Transitioning to the present moment, I am standing on the wooden deck of my own backyard, enjoying a perfect Saturday afternoon. The sun is shining brightly, and a gentle, warm breeze is blowing through the green trees. David is standing by the outdoor grill, flipping burgers and laughing softly to himself. The smell of barbecue fills the air, mixing with the fresh scent of the newly cut grass. Sitting at the patio table looking absolutely radiant and completely stress-free is Kendra. We did not just survive that horrible ordeal together, we forged an unbreakable bond. She is no longer just my sister-in-law, she is my chosen family. Her 8-year-old son is running across the bright green lawn chasing our golden retriever and giggling with pure, unadulterated joy. The atmosphere is so incredibly light and filled with genuine, unconditional love. There are no expectations, no hidden agendas, and no toxic gaslighting. We are just a group of people who deeply respect and protect one another. Suddenly, I feel a short vibration in the pocket of my jeans. I pull out my phone and look at the glowing screen. It is a text message from an unsaved number, but I instantly recognize the tone. It is a long, desperate paragraph from my mother, Brenda. She is begging for forgiveness, telling me how hard life has been in their small apartment, and asking if I could possibly find it in my heart to give them a small personal loan to help cover their rent this month. She ends the message by saying that blood is thicker than water and family is all we really have in the end. I stare at the glowing words on the screen. A year ago, a message like this would have sent me into a spiral of guilt and anxiety. I would have felt obligated to save them from the consequences of their own terrible choices. But today, standing in the warm sunlight, surrounded by the people who actually love me, I feel absolutely nothing. There is no anger, no sadness, and certainly no guilt. I simply press the settings icon on my phone, tap the block caller button, and permanently erase her number from my life. I slip the phone back into my pocket without a second thought. I walk over to the grill, pick up a plate with a fresh hot burger, and carry it over to the patio table. I hand the plate to Kendra with a bright, genuine smile. She smiles back, thanking me as David calls out that the hot dogs are ready for the kids. I sit down in my comfortable patio chair, taking a deep breath of the fresh air. For the first time in my entire 33 years of life, my heart is completely light. I finally have exactly what I always deserved: total and absolute peace. The most profound lesson I learned from this entire ordeal is that family is not defined by biology or by sharing a last name. True family is defined by mutual respect, unwavering honesty, and the consistent choice to protect one another. For decades, I allowed my parents and siblings to treat me poorly because society tells us we must always forgive our blood relatives, no matter how toxic they are. We are conditioned to believe that setting boundaries with our family is a sign of selfishness. But I learned the hard way that when people constantly use your loyalty to fund their lies and manipulate your emotions, walking away is not a failure. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. You do not owe your financial security, your mental health, or your happiness to people who only view you as a resource to be exploited. Sometimes the bravest thing you can ever do is recognize that the people who brought you into this world are the very people you need to leave behind to truly live. Protecting your peace is your highest responsibility. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to make the painful decision to cut ties with toxic family members to protect your own well-being? Have you ever realized that the people demanding your loyalty were actually the ones causing you the most harm? I would love to hear your personal stories and how you found the courage to establish your own boundaries in the comments below. Reading your experiences helps all of us realize that we are never alone in these difficult journeys. If my story resonated with you today, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more content about overcoming toxic relationships and taking back control of your life. Share this video with anyone who might need a reminder that it is perfectly okay to walk away from people who do not value their worth. Thank you so much for listening, and always remember that your peace of mind is absolutely priceless. Never let anyone convince you otherwise.